BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Think about the greatest unsolved mysteries, such as what lies at the deepest reaches of the ocean floor, or go out further across the galaxy and reflect on the enigma of black holes, or consider the entire universe and theories on the existence of dark matter. And yet there are still mysteries surrounding things more familiar to us, things we interact with every day but rarely ask, what are they made of? And that something is food.
I was astounded to learn that we actually measure a tiny portion of the molecules that make up our food.
This is Roy Steiner of the Rockefeller Foundation, who's overseeing one of the world's most ambitious research projects focused on food.
We measure a handful, anywhere from 25 to 150 molecules, traditionally in most food composition tables. And yet there are tens of thousands of molecules, many of which we're starting to understand are really quite important for our health. And we don't measure them and we don't understand them. It's like, oh my Lord, like we measure less than 1% of the food we actually put into our body. That means we know very little. And that to me was like a shock.
A shock that 5 years ago sent Roy on a mission to solve some of the mysteries of our food, an endeavour which, as we'll hear, could be as ambitious as a NASA project aimed at explaining the cosmos.
We are go for main engine start, T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
In 1990, the shuttle Discovery launched the Hubble telescope. In 2020, Roy and his team launched the PTFI, the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. And in searching for answers, they have a lot in common.
To date, we've understood our food the same way someone who is looking at the night sky with their bare eyes understood the sky. And with the PTFI, we've essentially created the Hubble telescope for food. And we can now look at the proverbial night sky and discover whole new worlds and understand things we never could in the past because we just did not have the tools. And what that's revealing to us is we really do not know a lot. And we need to know so much more if we want to have a food system that truly serves people and our planet.
In this programme, we'll be exploring the biomolecular food world the PTFI is attempting to map. Whereas the original periodic table organises elements based on their atomic structure and chemical behaviour, the periodic table of food is setting out to create a comprehensive, standardised and open-source database of all food composition. If successful, it could help answer some of the biggest questions about food and our health, the importance of diversity in diets, the impact of different farming systems on nutrition and the environment, and also the science of flavour. And as well as the PTFI, we'll meet other people on a mission to better understand the connection between food quality and flavour.
So here you have some pink radicchio, the Rosa del Veneto.
Beautiful colours.
Yeah, this is a stunning variety.
Franco Fubini, founder of the food business Natura and author of the award-winning book In Search of the Perfect Peach.
It makes complete sense that when all we had was our palate to dictate what should we be foraging, what should we be feeding ourselves, is that we were utilizing flavor and our palate to guide that. That our bodies will tell us this tastes good when something is good for us.
And we'll be hearing about a project based on an idea that our smartphones could one day be our guide to the most nutrient-dense and health-giving food.
Our basic concept is we can calibrate the camera in your phone, and you'll be able to go to the shop, to the grocery store, to the farmer's market, and flash a light at this bag of carrots and see, boop, boop, okay, this one's 20 out of 100. And flash a light at that bag of carrots, boop, boop, that one's 40 out of 100. Boop, boop, that one over here is 80 out of 100. It's kind of like the tricorder from Star Trek, if people remember Star Trek. It literally is a zip, okay, this is that, and this is that. Yeah, it's very exciting.
But let's start with the PTFI, the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. As I mentioned, its origins lie in the philanthropic organisation, the Rockefeller Foundation, which, in the 20th century, was instrumental in shaping the modern food system. It funded the agricultural research for the so-called Green Revolution, a now controversial revolution which spread around the world in the 1960s and 70s, transforming crop genetics in search of higher-yielding wheat and rice, a process that increased the supply of global calories. Chief among its architects was the agronomist Norman Borlaug.
I am not one to sit idly by and see man breed himself into a corner by increasing his numbers faster than food production is being increased. And if I have anything to contribute to this world, when I know that our scientific facts are right and we have materials that can be brought together in a meaningful production program, I'm going to play that card and play it hard.
The Senior Vice President for the Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation today is Roy Steiner.
You know, for over 100 years, the Rockefeller Foundation had been investing in food systems and agriculture, but almost exclusively in productivity. How do we create more food? Because that was the challenge of the time. And when we looked at what we had helped create, there's some extraordinary things about the food system. It does produce massive amounts of food. But we had really, I think, as a sector, forgotten about quality. What's the quality of the food and the implications of that?
As we'll be hearing, the Periodic Table of Food Initiative is now the work of a network of partners around the world, involving some of the leading research institutions in health and agriculture, including the American Heart Association and the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT, which specializes in crop diversity. But much of the work is coordinated from the Rockefeller Foundation's headquarters on Fifth Avenue in New York City, which is where I met two of the senior leaders of the project.
Hello, I'm Dr. John Delapara. I'm Director on the Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation.
Hello, I'm Selena Ahmed. I serve as the Global Director of the Periodic Table of Food Initiative based at the American Heart Association.
It's worth mentioning that before joining the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, both John and Selena trained as ethnobotanists and spent years in the field studying the relationship between people and plants. At the PTFI, they're still exploring that same relationship, but with three big questions in mind.
The central question that we're seeking to build evidence on is extremely simple, but we still don't have the answer for, and that is what is in food. We're eating food every day. It's critical for survival, for health, for enjoyment, and we still don't understand all of the complex biomolecules in food and how they interact with each other in ecosystems as well as in our bodies. The second question is, how do those compounds, those biomolecules that are in food, vary based on how food is grown, based on how it's processed, how it's stored, how it's prepared, and ultimately lands up on our plates and bowls? And then the third question is, what are implications of that food composition for our health as well as for the planet?
But I can imagine you thinking, I know what's in my food. When I go shopping, I can take a look at a label and see a breakdown of the nutrients. Or if I'm really interested, go to countless nutrition websites and see the dietary breakdown of a piece of fruit or a vegetable. But that's not the level of information we're focusing on here. Back to the analogy of the cosmos. Yes, it's possible to see a planet in the sky, but that other mysterious material that could explain more of the universe, the dark matter, it's the food equivalent of that the PTFI is in search of.
So often we go to the supermarket and have a nutrition label and we might see something like total dietary fiber or total protein, but that's a very simple story. When we actually look at the protein compounds, composition in food, we see that there's hundreds of thousands of unique proteins with their own structure, which means that they have their own function in our bodies. In fact, the Periodic Table of Food Initiative analyzed 500 foods, and in those foods, we found that there are 420,000 unique proteins. Each of those proteins, again, as I said, has its own structure and its own function in our bodies. And so we're really bringing precision to our measurement of what is in food. Likewise, for dietary fiber, it's not just total dietary fiber, it's very specific sugars and their linkages that make up fibers, and there's dozens of those. And then compounds that are not even mentioned on the nutrition label. Fruits and vegetables have thousands of these unique specialized metabolites, also known as secondary metabolites or phytochemicals. And the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, when we analyzed 500 foods, we found over 20,000 different specialized metabolites. Some of those are carotenoids, some of those are flavonoids, some of those are alkaloids. Again, each of those compounds have their own unique function in our bodies, as well as ecosystems.
And some of those molecules we don't even have names for yet. That's how speculative, this discovery is. When we think about our food, every food has developed in some specific ecological niche. And in that ecological niche, it may be attacked by predators, or it may be attracting pollinators, or there may be other things that cause that food to be its own special entity in the world, which means it has its own special collection of chemistry. And that chemistry we then consume when we eat it as food.
Yeah, and in so many ways, those biomolecules are memories. They're memories of a plant's experience in its place. They're memories of past histories, and they're memories of how those agroecosystems or those systems have been managed. And I think going back to that Hubble telescope example, right, we now have these tools to look at that diversity, to look at those diverse biomolecules in ways that we have not been able to see before.
This is the first step, right, to just understand what is in these foods. We might not understand a mechanism or understand even how or why a particular molecule might be healthful in some way. But the first step is to understand what is even there.
And there are good reasons why the Periodic Table of Food Initiative is taking place now. The tools Selena mentioned, capable of detecting and analysing the biomolecules in our food, have only recently become available.
There's two main advances that led to this moment. One is the ability to look at lots of data and make sense of it. So, of course, now we think about AI. 5 years ago, we weren't quite thinking about AI the way we're thinking about AI today, but big data, machine learning, were definitely in the zeitgeist at the time. So we saw the ability to look at lots of data was becoming easier. The other thing was amazing advances in mass spectrometry. Mass spectrometry is the science of actually looking at what is within our foods using highly analytical instrumentation.
Those were tools that had been starting to be used in the pharmaceutical sciences for drug discovery. And then with all of the global challenges with food, from diet-related chronic disease to unsustainable agricultural systems, it really seemed like now is the time to begin to use these tools and apply it to food.
Those two things, I think, are in terms of science, making those observations. So, well, now's the time. If we can standardize the technology, we can put it in a big database, we can start making sense of this complex information. And then can we distribute it? Can we distribute it to a lab in Ethiopia and Ghana and India and Japan and the US, and then get the same results in each of those labs?
But standardizing the process by which you could take a piece of fruit and know exactly what it's made of, regardless of which lab you're in, has proved far more difficult than anyone imagined. Roy Steiner.
We took a single apple, divided into 20 pieces, sent 2 each to 10 leading mass spectrometry labs in the world, and got completely different answers. Across the 1,200 molecules identified, only 14 in common. So, I mean, the fact that the leading mass spec labs couldn't reproduce their results means you basically didn't have science, because without reproducible results, you don't have science. And we didn't have the measurement. We didn't have a standardized way to measure food using mass spectrometry. Well, we do now.
But there's a problem. At a time when we can begin to understand the complexity of different foods around the world, much of that diversity is disappearing from diets. Gina Kennedy is principal scientist with the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SEAT, which is providing some of the agricultural expertise to the PTFI.
Patterns of eating are changing. There's, a term called the nutrition transition, and that means that people are really transitioning from a traditional diet to a diet that's a little bit more globally homogenized. About 50% of the dietary energy that we're consuming as population globally comes from about 5 species. So there's like real homogenization, and we're losing a lot of the diversification that we used to have in our diets.
Scientists at the New York Botanical Garden and Kew Botanical Garden have published a paper that there's over 35,000 edible plants on this planet, and we have estimations, if we take all of the other edible species, to be upwards of 50,000.
We just haven't even done the basics, like what is the basic value of these foods across kind of, we call them underutilized species, but now we're calling them opportunity crops or future crops or forever crops. So there's just so much of the world's edible biodiversity that we haven't even measured at all. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing is of even what we have measured, we've measured a very small fraction of what actually is important to us as humans.
So the idea was that, we wanted to seed the database with, originally it was 1,000 inspirational foods. It grew to almost 2,000 foods. But the process to do that was essentially reaching out to institutions, community groups, different types of people and groups all around the world on every continent and every region that we could contact. And that became the core list of, as we said, inspirational foods. These were foods nominated that people in those regions said, these are the things that we wish we had more information about.
People are going to be thinking, I want to know what an inspirational food is.
One fascinating example of an inspirational food are wattle seeds. Listeners in Australia will probably know very well what a wattle seed is, but I, as an American, hadn't heard of wattle seeds before.
This is the sound of wattle seeds being harvested. They're the seeds of a huge array of acacia. And to collect them, for thousands of years, Aboriginal people have covered the ground with blankets or animal hides and then shaken trees, releasing a shower of seeds.
I believe the institution that we partner with, I think the University of Adelaide, nominated dozens of different varieties of wattle seed that are and it's an endemic plant to Australia that's used by Indigenous people in all different types of ways, roasting and cooking in different ways. So that was certainly inspirational to me. We've been describing kind of very high-level scientific analytical methodologies, but at the end of the day, the questions are about how humans use food in their lives, which often has to do with culture and spirituality and all the things that give richness to our lives, family, and how we relate to each other. This science is only good when it's in service to those other parts of our life.
And there's a further extremely sensitive challenge to resolve for a project setting out to map the world's food diversity. Who owns and controls the data?
Before we even built the technology, how will we engage with Indigenous and frontline communities? How will we engage with countries around the world that have a history of being colonized and their data being used inappropriately or for profit without the profits going back to those folks? Now we're in a world where the data associated with those biological resources can be used for profit, can be used inappropriately. So that became actually one of the biggest things we started focusing on.
And here we're talking about something called DSI, Digital Sequence Information.
It sounds kind of obscure, but actually it is the data that's attached to biological resources that's generated all around the world. Think about genetic sequences, but also perhaps chemical data. A group of Indigenous people spend 10,000 years producing the perfect apple, let's say, and then we can measure the genetic sequence of that. What's to stop that genetic sequence being used for profit in some way in the future? That's the essential question. Or if we now know all the chemistry of that apple, can it be reproduced in some way? Or are there other things that might be censored around those data? That's the core question. So we helped convene Indigenous people, all types of interested parties that might want to solve this issue. And then at the conferences of the party on the Convention on Biological Diversity that are held around the world every 2 years, we helped to bring together agreements that would support that so that indigenous people's knowledge could be kept in a way that they would be compensated fairly, and that there would be some ability to actually make those data available for scientific advances. It needs to be both of those things, and that's a very tough line to walk. So that was one place that we saw as an initial start, initial focus of what this work needed to be before we even began developing the actual science of, how do you measure how many different types of lipids are in that apple.
With that framework in place, it became possible to develop a network of labs around the world, so-called centres of excellence, one in every continent, each capable of testing the food in a particular region or country. For example, there's a centre of excellence and a lab in Thailand.
Hi, my name is Nadine Sijamno. I'm a food technologist by training.
And she's based at the Institute of Nutrition in Mahidol University, around an hour from Bangkok. And in her lab, Nadine has been analysing some of Thailand's endangered foods, including the Java plum, which looks like a grape.
It has a purple color. It has been consumed for a long time in Thailand, but recently, 10 years ago, we find that people start to cutting it down. The tree is very big and tall, and we analyze the biomolecules.
Okay. What does it taste like?
It's sweet and bitter. Oh. Yeah, it's sweet and bitter. It also have very high anthocyanin properties. In addition to that, it contains 5,000 molecules in Java plum. So it was we thought, wow, only one Java plum that have 5,000 molecules, and some of the molecules also have drug-like compounds. So yes, as I mentioned, going back to our main purpose, we actually want the farmers to preserve the trees. So again, we got the questions from them why? What are the benefits? Yeah. I have been eating it for so long, since generation after generation, but therefore we need the data to make a decision. Without the data, we cannot make decision and convince them.
Well, I love the story of the Java plum. Can you share one other story with me?
Okay, the mushroom. Mushroom is usually grown in the forest, and it's a favorite food from the villagers. Why? Usually when I was a kid, my grandmother always tell me that her friends got cancer, and that it was suggested that you should eat mushroom. So there's belief and folk remedies that mushroom can cure cancer. But I was skeptical. It's no, mushroom, you have a cancer, you need to go to see doctor, not just eat a mushroom. But then as I'm growing up as a scientist, so we started to look more of the bioactive compound, and we started to think, probably our ancestor is right. Because they also have beta-glucan or other bioactive compound that could potentially had an anti-cancer property. So without the technologies, they know before that's already. So we now start to document the traditional knowledge as well as work with the community and look at the potential compounds that could be benefit for the health in mushroom in the forest.
Nadine's research into the health properties of mushrooms is ongoing, as is the case with other projects around the world. And according to British Cancer UK, there is research showing types of mushrooms can strengthen the immune system. But scientists are still yet to confirm these molecules can affect cancer cells. On a wider point of food as medicine, back to Roy Steiner.
We really do think that food is going to be one of the most powerful sources of healing in the world. Yeah, and, all indigenous cultures, that's how they did medicine. And in fact, 70% of the pharmaceuticals that we currently use today really are from plants. So if plants are the source of our current modern day pharmaceuticals, I totally see that in the future, you will go to the doctor and he'll look at your blood sample and he'll say, well, here's the diet you need for the next week. You need 100 milligrams of broccoli, 10 milligrams of quinoa, 40 milligrams of strawberries, because you're out of balance in this way. We can only do that if we understand what's in our food and we understand how those molecules affect our health. There's a long way to go scientifically to get there, because not only do you need to eat the right food, you need to have the right microbiome, and you have to have the right sleep and all these other things that contribute to health.
And adding to the complexity of the PTFI's mission is, as well as what we eat, the impact of how our food is grown also needs to be better understood. And Roy Steiner is convinced that these experiments taking place around the world will help us better understand the impact on nutrition of different farming practices.
We are already seeing the differences, right? So, we've got some regeneratively grown almonds versus conventionally grown almonds, and you see the molecular composition of those almonds are different. They're not the same. Now, whether that matters or not is the question that we have to ask science to continue working. And so, my hypothesis is, yes, it does matter because healthy soil will produce healthy plants. And we now have the tools to really go deep.
And now, well, it's already possible to go into the PTFI database and explore the diversity and complexity of our food.
We're just going to dive into the database right now. Dan, can you tell me something that potentially you've eaten for breakfast or you had yesterday? It may or may not be in the database, so we will see.
I was in a slightly unusual location yesterday, which meant that I had 5 different types of citrus.
Okay, so let's just see what citrus we have in our database right now. So we can search by food or we can search by compound. So I'm going to search by food. And here we can see sort of the common name and we have the scientific name. So I'm seeing we have mandarin orange, kumquat, grapefruit, lime, lemon. But how about we jump into looking at the composition of a mandarin orange? Okay, so over here
what I learned from the database is that the mandarin tested by the PTFI contains thousands of different proteins and 60 different fiber and sugar components and their linkages with other compounds, one of which is called arabinose.
Arabinose has been getting a lot of attention in the scientific literature for its role as a prebiotic. It doesn't get digested in the digestive system and then goes on into our guts and feeds good beneficial gut microbiota. So that is a sugar that's been getting a lot of attention really for gut health and also very much linked to brain health. And then we can see that very specific...
And then as we delve deeper into the components of a mandarin, we start to see the compounds that give me the sensory experience of citrus.
So here we begin to see things like naringenin and limonene, and those very much contribute to the flavor of citrus. But then there's also all of these compounds that we have their formula for and we don't know exactly what they are. And so that's where the discovery begins to happen.
John de la Parra.
In the case of flavor and smell, or even revulsion from smell, all of these are evolved responses. Our bodies respond to some portion of the chemistry. So there is a possibility that we may see even more interesting and rich information about flavor and taste and smell, because we will for the first time be able to actually see what all the different compounds are that constitute that complexity.
I mean, I would say like our mouths and our noses are like the ultimate mass spectrometers, right? We think about like mass specs as these $500,000 instruments in labs, which they are, but humans are mass spectrometers in many different ways, right? We have the ability to perceive what is in food. We have the ability to perceive with our senses.
Have or had?
That's that's almost philosophical, right? And I would say some studies have shown that communities that live more in context to the environment have higher sensory perception. And as we've moved away and sort of lost that connection, that connectivity for kind of survival decisions to the environment, we have lost that sensory ability. And I think, fostering that through mindful eating is one way to begin to build back that discernment.
Selina Ahmed of the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. 6 miles east of the Rockefeller Foundation's headquarters is a warehouse in Brooklyn, where another experiment connecting flavor and health is taking place.
We'll just open up this pallet here so that we can inspect one of the first boxes of rhubarb. We're looking at the beautiful dark red color of the stalks, not just on the outside, but kind of throughout the product as well, and looking at very bright, almost iridescent green leaves that are a result of the forcing process. But here in New York, it's unparalleled in quality. I mean, the pastry chefs really fiend over this.
Yeah, this is grown by Robert Tomlinson and family.
This is Franco Fubini, founder of Natura, with his senior operations manager Santi Bonetti. 20 years ago, starting in London, Franco had the ambition of finding farmers around the world growing food with the most flavour and getting that produce into the kitchens of leading chefs, which is why a pallet of Yorkshire forced rhubarb has just arrived into Natura's New York hub.
There's a very little amount of product that we bring over from Europe. And we do that where we find that product is of an exceptional quality, and more importantly, where we feel we're preserving a piece of cultural heritage and some of these fantastic farming practices. One of them being forced rhubarb, which is a very highly regarded, highly respected product grown in the north of England. And it's done so with this farming practice that is very rare, and it's that forcing in the dark in the sheds. So we feel that the act of transporting it, of flying it in, is more than compensated by the fact that we're broadening the market and the scope for a product that is so incredibly beautiful and magical, and we're preserving this part of our human heritage.
Throughout the year, around 600 different types of fresh produce will arrive in this warehouse, mostly from the 100 or so farms Natura works with in the US. But there's also some produce so special it arrives from Europe.
So here you have some pink radicchio, the Rosa del Veneto.
Beautiful colours again. Oh.
Yeah, this is a stunning variety.
Franco is convinced that one of the biggest casualties of the modern food system has been flavour. In his book, In Search of the Perfect Peach, he explains his reasoning behind the 20-year mission to save and in some cases bring back lost flavours. Focus on flavour, he believes, and you end up with a food system that's better for us and better for the planet.
When you focus all of the processes, whether it's on the farming side, the cooking, the canning process, when you're really obsessive about flavor and producing optimal quality, you get a really phenomenal result. And that tends to be in polar opposite to the industrialization of the food system that we've seen. And hence my, the theory that I have and the whole purpose of the book is to tell people you don't need to understand how someone has produced something. You don't need to understand where a product has come from. If I give you 2 tinned tomatoes to taste and you taste one that is exceptional and one that is acidic and bitter, let flavor guide you, and flavor is going to be an indicator and a conduit for better farming practices, better processing of product, and more nutrition.
And you're convinced that we're all capable of that? That many of us have grown up in a food environment where our palates have been bombarded with some really powerful and often quite simplistic flavors, but we all have it within us to detect the good stuff, the flavor that you're describing.
I think we are. I think we're genetically predispositioned as a species to detect flavor.
I completely get the argument about the joy, the pleasures of this. During the 20th century, we ended up with an agricultural system that was geared towards quantity. That we went for the yield. We went for the argument that we needed to fill bellies. Why is it that we need to reclaim flavour? What has been lost and why does it matter so much?
So if you work backwards, you lose joy, you lose the appreciation and the love of food. That has an important impact in the design of the food system, right? Because something that brings me joy is something that I value. And when I value something, I will allocate more of my attention, more of my resources, right? That means that I will feed more resources, more money into the food system, right? So joy has a visceral emotional connection that then helps us design a better food system through our choices. It also impacts nutrition because flavor has a direct correlation with nutrition, right? So eating flavorful foods directly impacts our health. And in order to produce good quality flavor, we need to farm in a way that is responsible to the soil and the ecosystem that we're farming in. So we're protecting and nourishing and regenerating those soils by farming for flavor.
So you're arguing that flavour is an indicator of something much bigger, that it doesn't just exist in isolation, in a vacuum. Flavour is connected with all of these other things.
Flavor is what connects the entire food system to us as part of the food system, right, as other animals in the food system. And if you go back and you think in evolutionary terms, it's interesting because I was hearing a doctor talk about the way that she always rationalizes things is think about how did we do it when we were cavemen in order to understand these inbuilt responses that we have. And it makes complete sense that when all we had was our palate to dictate what should we be foraging, what should we be feeding ourselves, is that we were utilizing flavor and our palate to guide that. So it makes complete evolutionary sense that our bodies will tell us this tastes good when something is nutrition and good for us. And it also makes evolutionary sense that things that are good for the planet, for the ecosystem, for nature, right, are things that are flavorful because that whole system is interconnected. So if nature was producing flavor but at the expense of its soils, it wouldn't make any sense because there wouldn't be any continuity or longevity to that. But pre-agriculture, nature was producing things in harmony with its own being, producing food that was nutritious for the animals that are inhabiting that landscape, and therefore that whole symbiotic ecosystem was working in harmony. We've created a food system, we've invented agriculture, we've domesticated plants and animals. We now just need to make sure that we do that, again, in harmony with nature. So we need to produce flavor in a way that maximizes nutrition, maximizes the health of our soils, and maximizes our own health and the health of the planet.
Franco Fubini, who, without a single mass spectrometer in sight, is reaching similar conclusions to the Periodic Table of Food initiative. There does seem to be a wider movement in which food quality and new science are converging. Our third example of this is the work of farmer Dan Kitteridge. In 2010, he founded the Bionutrient Institute with the vision of increasing food quality and testing food from farms in a network of labs. And the conclusion he's reached, it's all about the living soil.
What we found in our work, our research and data collection and publications, is that there is a very dramatic nutrient variation in food across the board, and that we find that in organic, we find that in local, we find that in regenerative, we find that in no-till, we find it in soil types and different genetics, points of purchase. You cannot predict nutrient level by a certification label, by a individual practice. It seems to be that it's the level of function of the microbiome in the soil that is the primary causal dynamic in the level of nutrition in the food, which, if you understand evolutionary biology, makes entire sense. The way plants have evolved to grow for hundreds of millions of years is in deep symbiosis with their microbiome. And lo and behold, when you have a well-functioning microbiome for that plant, it is healthier, it has better pest and disease resistance, it has greater levels of biochemical complexity, which we call flavor and aroma. And we've got a lot of system function, right, in our body. And why, you could ask, does nature consider the ability to discern flavor and aroma to be so important? And I would argue that from an evolutionary perspective, those nutrients that correlate with flavor and aroma in high concentrations are symptomatic of a level of overall sophistication in the food stuff. And so that's what we've evolved for, is those things we call flavor, those plant secondary metabolites, the polyphenols, the terpenoids, the alkaloids, are only built into the food through nature when a bunch of other things are happening well. Our thought is we really shouldn't need PhDs or instruments or spectrometers or anything. We already are wired with the most sophisticated nutrient monitoring system we would ever need, and that's inbuilt.
But you're also convinced, Dan, that we will be eventually able to test ourselves for high levels of nutrients using technology most of us carry around in our pockets.
Our basic concept is our smartphones are so sophisticated that the cameras in them can function like a spectrometer. And so once we've been able to characterize a 1 to 100 scale in potatoes or cucumbers or beef or eggs or whatever it is, we can calibrate the camera in your phone, and you'll be able to go to the shop, to the grocery store, to the farmer's market, and flash a light at this bag of carrots and see, boop, boop, okay, this one's 20 out of 100. And flash a light at that bag of carrots, boop, boop, that one's 40 out of 100. Boop, boop, that one over here is 80 out of 100. There's a spectrum of nutrient variation in carrots, in cucumbers, in milk, in potatoes, and that can be read with spectroscopy, non-invasively. So the idea is those who care about the well-being of their families and understand nutrition is an important thing, when we succeed, hopefully in the next 5 years, we'll be able to, with our smartphones, go to their points of purchase and be able to ignore all the labels, all the marketing, all the certifications, have a handheld scientific instrument. Yeah, it's very exciting that technology has proceeded to this degree, and it's, with all the work we've done so far, it seems like it's entirely plausible.
Dan Kitteridge from the Bionutrient Institute and his own search for the science of flavour. We end on a final thought from John de la Parra of the Periodic Table of Food Initiative. Wherever the science takes us, he believes, we still have so much to learn from the diversity of food that still exists around the world and the food cultures in which food, flavour and traditional knowledge can still be found.
The world of food and people is much more beautiful and richer than I could have ever imagined or read about. The diversity of what people eat and how people eat it and how they've evolved to create beautiful and amazing and delicious things is more amazing than I could have imagined. The other thing is this beauty is disappearing more quickly than I could have imagined as well. What that has led me to think more of, and the way that I try to do the work that I do now. Previously, there's always been a call to action that we need to bring everyone to the table. People always coming to the table where decisions are made, and that is very important, of course. But often I think the humility to go to other places and participate in other folks' way of living and being and eating is even more important.